As we mentioned in the last module, this door is reminiscent of a couple of industrial accidents that have happened in the past. One of them being for Imperial Foods. It was a chicken nugget factory in North Carolina where 25 people were killed and 50 people were hospitalized from a fire that happened. And in this specific case, the doors were locked because they were worried about the theft of chicken parts or processes or chickens themselves. They basically processed the chickens in this plant and then turned them into chicken nuggets, you know, the old parts is parts thing. And what happened is there was a failure of a hydraulic system which led to the spontaneous combustion of the deep fat fryer, which caught on fire, and then people tried to exit the building and couldn't get out of the building. They were pounding on doors, trying to kick down doors to get out in the case of the fire. The combustion byproducts, however, soon caused people to become overcome, and so you had these groups of people that were killed as a result of that. And in that specific case, the federal government came in and took away North Carolina's authority to have their own OSHA program, similar to what Michigan has. We have a Michigan OSHA, or MyOSHA as they call it, which enforces the same laws or more strict laws in the state program. In this case, North Carolina took away that ability of, or rather the federal government took away the ability of the North Carolina OSHA to operate, and they were in probation for a long period of time. They just recently came out of that. This fire occurred in 1991. Additionally, I went through another facility and another food processing facility, and they had the same situation where the door was locked, where you couldn't get out. And it was due to theft again. People were stealing egg rolls in this case, so they decided to lock all the doors. And in that case, you can't have a situation where a fire door is locked. Now, sometimes they put on these electronic systems which will allow you to go out after you push the button for a while. That will work as long as it stays reliable. The danger to employees must be minimized. In the exit route, you can't have combustible liquid stored like what's seen here in this picture. This is a fire exit route, and you've got a bunch of storage that happens. It's very common. It's an exit route. Nobody uses it. Just that's a great place to store things. Here's another example. This happens to be a hospital, and this is the storage for a fire exit. Lighting and marking must be adequate. What's ironic is, if you remember back in the fire video with the Christmas tree fire, you saw that the smoke rises immediately to the top. And where are the exit signs? They're at the top. Now, some states are starting to require, or some municipalities, having fire exits down low so you can see it in the case of a fire. You can figure out where to go. Because in all candor, if you don't know where to go before the fire takes off, you're not going to find that exit. You can crawl around. Unless you know how to get out of there, you're not going to get out unless it's illuminated like this. Now, this happened to be at an insurance company that I worked for. What's ironic is, which way do you go? But the most ironic thing is that this is the fire exit right here. So both of these signs should point right to this door. This is the same the same insurance company. This exit sign is hardly visible. They put actually two on top of each other, and neither one of them is very visible. Nice electric joint there, too. As clearly marked exits are important, so is the case of a non-exit, or not an exit, as in this case. Now you see the door says no smoking. This is actually the door to a flammable liquid storage room. This is not an area you want to go in the case of a fire. But if you look at the door, you see the reinforced glass, which typically indicates a fire-rated door. The natural inclination might be to say, oh, this is a fire exit. The door, however, opens into the building versus out. That's a dead giveaway that it's not an exit. Here's an example of that interlock system that I spoke with you about, where you got to hold the door 15 seconds and then an alarm sounds and then the door will actually open. These are fine as long as they maintain the electrical integrity and they work. A lot of these are battery powered, and batteries go bad. They go dead. And unless you maintain them, there's a little servo switch, a little relay that allows the door to be opened. And if the battery's dead, it won't operate anymore during construction. This is a critical factor because during construction, you can have exit routes that might be different or more congested. And in the case like what's happening in this facility, you've got 1,000 employees. Of this, about 200 could come through this specific area. You need to make sure that all those people can get through there in the case of a fire or an emergency situation. The next thing is that communication system. This is really critical for plant facilities that have explosive or hazardous materials or chemicals that could be released, besides and above and beyond the normal communication. For like at LCC, if we have a situation where we're in a student environment where we've got the potential for a violent situation, we need to make sure that that gets communicated to people, because we're going to respond differently to that than we would to a fire or a natural disaster. We would respond similar to a natural disaster in that we would go to interior spot, shut off the lights, close the door, try to act like nobody's there. But in the case like in the petroleum plant that we saw earlier, you've got an explosion and an explosive potential, which is hugely hazardous. And having employees know and people that are on the facility know that, hey, you need to evacuate this area. Communicating that hazard is going to be important. So the very first step in a emergency evacuation program is to identify the unique hazards, or what are the hazards at the facility. You have to identify that. Then you have to communicate that and train people in what to do in the case of that emergency. Finally, you need to drill it, and you need to make sure in the case of a disaster, you've identified safe areas, you've identified what are evacuation routes, you've identified congregation areas, you've identified a way to and communicated a way to account for all the people that are in the facility. So here's an example of the employee alarm system. You see you've got smoke detectors, heat detectors, which are going to detect fires. You saw in that video clip of the nightclub, you heard, and you saw maybe the strobe when they had the fire, they needed to get out of there. But you looked at it, it was obviously too late. So you, in the classroom, on any facility, you're going to see a strobe light and a horn so that you can communicate the fact that there's a hazard to those that are visual impaired and hearing impaired. There's pull stations which are going to identify the ways of communicating it. So that communication system must be effective. And if you've got more than one kind of hazard, you need to make sure that people understand what that hazard is and the communication means. Outdoor exit routes. Now, here you see this facility, this plant. There's 1,000 employees that worked in this facility. They have to exit through these kind of exit routes. What's imperative is you can only have one person at a time go through these in each doorway. That may not provide enough evacuation time to get everybody out. So there needs to be an adjacent exit route that's free and unobstructed. Emergency action plans. You need to train people in that. Have the employees understand what the hazards are. Fire prevention plans, we talked about that. Controlling the hazards, the combustibles. Storage of materials is also one of the issues. Making sure you don't have readily combustible or explosive environments that are not protected from a fire prevention standpoint and from a fire control standpoint. Flammable liquid storage rooms should not be located in the middle of the plant. They need to be located on an outside wall. So if there's a fire or an explosion, it takes out the outside of the wall, doesn't take out the plant itself. What do you think of this question? When multiple businesses share the occupancy of one building, employers should consider coordinating emergency action plans or fire prevention plans. Absolutely, they should. One company that I visited blended flammable and combustible liquids. Those flammable and combustible liquids are heavier than air, and in the center and in the lowest spot of that plant, there was a auto repair place that they had overhead doors. They said, hey, let's get some more money. So they leased out that area to this auto repair place, and all those heavier than air materials congregated in that low area, and that company specialized in doing exhaust work. Exhaust work means you're going to have a cutting torch, and you're going to have that. And so you see where this could go and lead. Having those two companies coordinate their emergency response and make sure that the two locations are consistently protected is really critical.